Okay, welcome everyone. So yesterday was insightful because we were able to do a lot of stuff, including appreciating what Epi Info can actually do. So we did some basic data analytics using the Epi Info software itself, but we focused on analyzing the data, which is this classic aspect. So we're able to come here, which is the analysis aspect, and we were able to load the data using read. Then we're able to choose the format our database was saved, which is Excel 97 2003 format. And we're able to locate where our source document is, which for me, I saved it on the desktop, and we're able to open it and okay. So we're actually working with a sheet intervention because that is where our data is actually saved. So we open it and we're ready to analyze. So to run the frequency for any variable, and we have said that frequency is usually for categorical variables, all right? Whether it is nominal variable or it is ordinal variable, they are categorical, and you can only generate frequency and percentages for them. So for those sort of variables, you can come to frequency. Okay, like I said, you're able to generate frequency and percentages. So to generate the frequency, you come to this because for EpiInfo, it is this statistics folder. That is where you do most of your work. All right. Basically, the data folder, and you just go to read for EpiInfo to be able to read the data. And the reason is because the data entry was not done in Epi Info. I think someone asked a question yesterday, and I said it is easier to do your data entry in Excel because the data cleaning in Excel is much easier. The data cleaning, when you enter your data in Epi Info, is actually cumbersome and it takes a lot of time, you know. So because that data entry was not done in Epi Info, it doesn't have Epi Info format, you have to let Epi Info read that format you have. That's why you have to come here first. Then once it has read the format, it's going to show you something like this read and where it is reading it from, which is from your drive C. In my own case, I saved it on the desktop. See, that's why you can see desktop, and this is the file itself. It's an Excel file in the intervention sheet. So it depends on where you're saving yours. It doesn't really matter as long as you can access where the file is and allow EpiInfo to read it. Once EpiInfo reads it and is able to show you this instruction here, then you're good with your analysis. So the first thing you do, like I mentioned yesterday, is your descriptive statistics. So for your categorical variable, you just run frequency and percentages. So you come here under the folder statistics and you click your frequencies, and you can do frequency star, frequency of star. And if you do frequency of star, it's going to analyze all the variables you have. It's going to give you frequency and percentages. However, you can choose each variable at a time. I can choose age range and analyze it. So this is the age range. This is the frequency. This is the percentage. So we don't usually use the cumulative percent in our analysis table. It also gives you Wilson's 95% confidence limit. If you need it, you can add it, but we don't usually use confidence limit for frequencies, but we use confidence limit for odds ratios and relative risk, which is part of the focus for today's session. So if you want to run another frequency, you come there and choose another variable, maybe COVID-19 test result, which is one of our main explanatory variable. And it shows us that the positive cases for COVID-19 tests, there were 98 of them. 26.85%. And for negative test result, they were 267, giving us 73.15. And I was saying, how did Epi Info get 26.85 is simply saying 98 times 100% divided by the total population 365. That will give you 26.85%. All right. So that is what you do if you want to run your frequencies. But if you want to run the summary statistics for your continuous variable, means, median, you come here to means. You just click means and you can choose means of the continuous variable. A continuous variable we have is age. We can do means of age and you say okay, and it's going to generate the means. As you can see here, it will give you the mean age, which is 34.22. It will give you the standard deviation, which is 12.54. It will also give you the median and the interquartile range, which is the 25th percentile and the 75th percentile. And I said that you don't just make a decision whether you're going to use mean or whether you're going to use median. You have to run the Shapiro-Wilk normality test, all right, using SPSS. And I showed you that. So let's open the particular data that we're going to use for that. It's on the desktop. It's an Excel sheet. This is it. So if we open that data, and this is age. So you run normality test for the continuous variable. So to run the normality test for age, we come to analyze descriptive statistics and we go to explore. Then you put in the dependent list the continuous variable. Like how you would know continuous variables in XPSS, like I mentioned yesterday, is you're going to see this ladder sign. Once you see this ladder sign, it tells you that it's a continuous variable. But if you see these cycles, it tells you they are categorical variables. Simply means some of the values may be blue, some of the values may be red, some of the values may be A. Like for example, now you have sex. Sometimes you have female, sometimes you have male. Educational level, sometimes you have no formal, sometimes you have primary, sometimes you have secondary, sometimes you have tertiary. So that's what is this different color boxes are telling you. But when it comes to the continuous, it's a continuous, is numbers that are increasing, that don't have an end. And the reason why it is continuous is because it has decimals, like I mentioned yesterday. Not necessarily because of the numbers, but because of the decimals, because the numbers itself can be discrete. But when it is decimals, then it is continuous. So to do the Shapiro-Wilk or the Kolmogorov, you just put your age, which is part of the continuous variable, in your dependent list, and you come to options, I think plots, and choose normality plot with test. That's all you do. You continue and you say, okay, it's going to generate the plot, but the most important part is this test for normality and the p-value. Like I mentioned yesterday, when you have a p-value that is statistically significant, like in this case, our p-value is 0.000, it is statistically significant. The interpretation is age significantly deviates from normality. So meaning age is skewed, meaning the data for age is collected in such a way that it is favoring one group of age over the other, meaning the data collection was not randomized. That's why you're having a skewed age, because if you check the way the age is flowing, you will see that some group will have more, some group will have much less. It's not really balanced. And I mentioned to you that I suspect the data will be skewed because that data, I sort of generated it kind of for the practice purpose. So it was not really like a data I collected randomly from participants. Okay. So because our age is not normally distributed, what that means is for our summary statistics, we will not be using means and standard deviation. Instead, we'll be using median and interquartile range. It is the median that will represent the age average or summary better. So we went further to do some inferential statistics, and I also mentioned to you that every research you do, you would have a hypothesis, because that is part of what is motivating your work. Yeah, so someone was asking, well, SPSS is not free. SPSS has a license, so it's not free. So which is why I was saying that Epi Info is free, but SPSS is not free. You will need a license. And someone was asking Smirnoff or Shapiro, whichever one you use is fine. Okay? Smirnoff or Shapiro Week. Smirnoff or Shapiro Week, anyone you use is fine. It doesn't really matter, okay? Both of them are acceptable. They are both normality tests. But like I said, Shapiro Week is very popular. So most times you would see people use Shapiro Week test, but the SPSS will generate both. Anyone you feel comfortable with, you use. They are both okay. So I went further to say for the inferential statistics, you would have a hypothesis for you to do an inferential statistics. Okay. And in the data that I shared with you, the Excel sheet, let me open it again. I have so many variables here. The highlighted columns, they are the continuous variables, you know, but the other ones are the categorical variables. And I mentioned that my outcome variable, the main reason why I am doing this study is this one, depression status, which is what I mentioned. So this is what is motivating me to do this work, depression status, which is my dependent variable, and also COVID-19 test result. COVID-19 test result. So I wanted to know, let me remove these highlights from the continuous variable. I wanted to know if the COVID-19 test result would influence their depression status. That is what is motivating me to do this work. Although there are many other things, okay, but I'm just using a primary aim for this study. So when you have a primary aim for a study and you are now associating two variables, first, you will have to have an independent. You will have to have an independent variable. Very important, the variable of variables, there can be more. So for this study, I have several independent variables. Age can be independent, gender, all the other variables are all independent variables. But my interest for the analysis that I want to do now is the COVID-19 test results. That is my interest for the independent variable. Okay? Then what is motivating me to do this study, which is what I want to find out, is the dependent variable. That dependent variable is also called outcome variable. It's also called outcome variable. Independent variable is also called explanatory variable. Explanatory variable. That's another name for it. Now, the dependent variable for this work is that depression status that I showed you. That is what is motivating this work, depression status. Now, why is it called dependent? Because the depression status is dependent on the independent variable. In other words, the COVID-19 test result is the determining factor whether they will be depressed or not, according to this study that I am doing. So I wanted to know whether their COVID-19 test results, will make them susceptible to having depression. So now I have identified my independent variable. I've identified my main outcome variable for the study. Then you have to draft your null hypothesis. Your null hypothesis would be there is no statistical significant association between the COVID-19 test results and the depression status. That is the null hypothesis. Okay? That is the null hypothesis. The alternate hypothesis will now be alternate hypothesis. The null hypothesis sometimes is represented as H0, while the alternate hypothesis, you represent it as H1. Okay, so the alternate will be there is a statistically significant association between COVID-19 test result and depression status. So now you will now have to run the comparative analysis so that you will know whether you would accept your null hypothesis or you will reject your null hypothesis. So in Epi Info, I showed you that if you want to run comparative, where you are going to be associating or testing for the difference in percentages, you're going to be using the chi-square. And we went to tables. Sorry, not means. We went to tables and your exposure variable, as epidemiologists, independent variable, explanatory variable, sometimes it's also called exposure variable. Exposure variable. The variable that the dependent is exposed to for it to change. All right. So it's also called the exposure variable. So that's a third name for it. And we use exposure variable more as epidemiologists. All right. So let's progress. So my exposure variable in this case is the COVID-19 test result. Then the outcome variable, which is the dependent variable, is now the depression status, the dichotomous one, the one I have broken down into two values. So you put your exposure variable here, you put your depression status here, and you say, okay. Oh, sorry, I'm supposed to use the dichotomous one. Sorry, I used the wrong one. So I'll go back, choose my COVID-19 test result, then the depression, the dicot one. Sorry, I choose the wrong one. The one that are splitted into two values. This is the right one. So our COVID-19 test result is positive and negative. All right. And I mentioned to you that we are using row percentages, not column percentages. All right. We're using row percentages because the depression status, we have two values, depression and no depression. And depression and no depression are both inside the depression status. You use column percentages when you have two distinct groups. For example, this place here, the first part will be like your baseline, then the second part may be like your intervention. These are two different groups. Then you can use column percentage. But if they are like yes and no inside malaria status or positive or negative inside malaria or something, you would use row percentage. Row percentage is saying 55.10 and 44.90 is 100%. 38.58 and 61.42 is 100%. That's row percentage. That's the one we're interested in. Why column percentage is saying 34.39 plus 65.61 is 100%. Also 21.15 and 78.85 is 100%. But in this case, our interest is in the column percentages. Okay, so looking at this now, we can see that for the COVID-19 test result, the positive cases for depression were 55.10, while the negative cases were 38.58. So if we check the difference in percentages, we can say 55.10 minus 38.58. So meaning there's a difference of 16.52%. there's a difference of what? 16.52% in terms of a 16.52% higher depression state in those that tested positive for COVID-19 compared to those that tested negative. Now, this difference of 16.52, is this difference large enough to cause a significant difference? That is what the chi-square is going to tell us. Chi-squared, because we are checking for differences in percentages. 55.10 against 38.58. We got 16.52. So this 16.52 increase in depression status in those that are positive compared to those that are negative, is it statistically significant? Our chi-square will help tell us. Now we go to our chi-square. Like I mentioned, we have three chi-squares here. Chi-square uncorrected, chi-square Manter-Hansel, and chi-square Yates corrected. Epi Info gives you three different chi-squares and three different two-tailed p-values. But SPSS only gives you one, which is the Pearson's chi-square. Now, the value for the chi-square uncorrected is the same as the Pearson's chi-square you find in SPSS. So when you analyze this data, if your study design is a cross-sectional study design or any other study design, you can either use the uncorrected chi-square or use the Yates corrected chi-square. The Manter-Hansel chi-square is only reserved for case control study, where your study design is a case control study. That's when you use the Manter-Hansel chi-square. So in this case now, our chi-square, if we're using the uncorrected, our chi-square is 7.98. But chi-squares don't have ranges. So if you're looking at your chi-square, you will not be able to tell whether the difference that you just observed now, which is the 16.52, is statistically significantly higher. So looking at the chi-square 7.9866, you can't tell because chi-squares don't have ranges. That is why anytime you run an inferential statistics, it will give you the test of significance and it will also give you the p-value. All right? It is the p-value that gives you a clue what your chi-square is saying. I have a webinar. I did a webinar a few weeks ago on statistical significance and test of significance. So I will encourage you to go and watch that webinar, okay? And have more insight on statistical significance and test of significance, okay? So the chi-square would not be able to give you a clue. It is the p-value that does. So looking at our p-value, which is 0.0047, this value is less than 0.05, which is our cutoff. So we can say there's a statistical significant difference. What does this statistical significant difference means in this case now? It means that I can say for sure that those that tested positive have a 16.52 significantly higher prevalence for depression compared to those that tested negative. With full confidence, I can beat my chest with full confidence that if people that tested positive for COVID-19 will have a 16.52% increase in depression status compared to those that tested negative, and that finding has evidence. So the p-value is the evidence that there is a significant increase in depression in the COVID-19 positive result participants. So that's what this evidence is telling us. So if we go back to our null hypothesis now that says there is no statistical significant association between COVID-19 test result and depression status, we are going to reject this null hypothesis. We are going to reject it. Why are we rejecting this null hypothesis? Because our p-value was statistically significant. So we are going to reject the null. We're going to accept the alternate hypothesis. Okay? So we're going to accept our alternate hypothesis because based on our p-value, we can see that there's a statistical significant difference. Okay, now, progressing to what we will do today, I ignored the odds ratio and the risk base. That's what we are doing today. So I needed this background so that we can dive into that. Now, what is the odds and what is the risk? Okay, if we look at this photo here, the risk ratio is the risk of disease among the exposed divided by the risk among the unexposed. Risk ratio is the risk of disease among the exposed divided by the risk among the unexposed. Now, let's look at our example. Now, who are the exposed? Positive. Who are the exposed here? COVID-19 test result positive. They are the exposed. Who are the unexposed here? COVID-19 test result negative. They are the unexposed. So let's look at that again. The risk of disease among the exposed divided by the risk among the unexposed. I repeat again, who are the exposed here? COVID-19 test result positive. Who are the unexposed? COVID-19 test result negative. So the risk of disease, what disease are we talking about? Depression. So the disease here is depression. So the risk ratio will tell us the ratio between the exposed and the unexposed. That's the risk ratio. The odds ratio is the same thing. But why the first one is risk, the second one is odds. Their interpretation is the same, but one is risk, the other one is odds. Now, why is this one risk and why is this one odds? The one that is odds is probability. Anything odds is probability. The odds of exposure among cases divided by the odds of exposure among control. So meaning that for the odds ratio, whatever disease they are exposed to, it's a probability. You will not be able to beat your chest and say that the exposure caused the disease for sure. Let me use a very good example to differentiate both based on the study design. Now, in a cohort, let's assume we have cross-sectional study design. Now, what is a cross-sectional study design? In a cross-sectional study design, you take a cross-section of participants that are exposed to whatever condition you're interested in. For instance, now using the example we have, our participants are those that are going to test for COVID-19. That's our population. All right, those that have gone to test for the COVID-19, and those that tested positive, they are the exposed. Those that tested negative, they are the unexposed. Now, the disease now is whether they would be depressed or not depressed. So you take a population of people and you test them for COVID-19. Now, if you look at these our results here, I think the descriptive, yes. So let's look at the descriptive. The prevalence of positive cases for COVID-19 is 26.85. That is the prevalence for COVID-19 test result amongst this population. So for a cross-sectional study, you take an exposed population. In that exposed population, you want to know how many of them tested positive. That's a cross-sectional study. So it's usually a prevalence study. All prevalence studies are cross-sectional studies. So anytime you want to do a study and one of your specific objective is to determine the prevalence of preeclampsia, to determine the prevalence of tuberculosis, to determine the prevalence of malaria, as long as there is a prevalence in one of your specific objectives, by default, that is a descriptive cross-sectional study. Why descriptive? Because it's one population. So in this case now, for the COVID-19, we are dealing with one population of those that are testing. But if you are now dealing with two different populations, okay, let's say you have a population in Baseline population, maybe you have another population, intervention population. These are two different populations you want to test for the prevalence of COVID-19. Then it will be analytical cross-sectional study. Analytical cross-sectional study when you have two distinct populations. But if it's just one population, then it's descriptive cross-sectional study. So all prevalence studies are cross-sectional study. So you have determined the prevalence of COVID-19, which is 26.85. Now you have run an association here, and that association have generated a relative risk and an odds ratio. Now, but you are not going to be using the relative risk for cross-sectional study. Why are you not using relative risks but odds? Because you were not responsible, okay, for the exposure. You invited them to come for COVID-19 tests, but you didn't put them in an environment that made them susceptible to being positive for COVID-19. In a cross-sectional study, you are not responsible for the exposure. The exposure is in the environment. All right? Unlike in the second study design now, which is the cohort study. If this was a cohort study and not a cross-sectional study, what I would do is I will have a group of people and I will tell them, don't wear nose masks, don't wash your hands, you can go to a crowded place, you can go to party, do all you can, there's no problem. That's my exposed group. Then I'll have another group I will tell, please wear nose masks, please wash your hands, please don't associate yourself in a place that have crowd. All right, that's my control group. So I have my case group, the group that my exposed group, and I have my control group. So in a cohort study, I have a group that I'm going to expose, and I'm exposing them, and I will follow them up for like 3 months. Then after that 3 months, I will now do their COVID-19 test result and see how many of them test. That's a cohort study. You expose them to what you think will generate the outcome you are interested in. And you follow them over time to see whether they will, have that outcome. But in a cross-sectional study, whether they wash their hands or wear nose masks or the rest, you were not responsible for that. It's their decision to make. It's in the environment. That's why you cannot say risk. You can only say odds of risk, because you cannot beat your chest and say the reason why they tested positive for COVID-19 is because they didn't wear nose masks. You don't know that. You can't say for a cross-sectional study, oh, the reason why they tested positive for COVID-19 is because they were found in the crowd. You can't say that because you were not responsible for the exposure. But in a cohort study, you were responsible for the exposure. You told them not to wear nose masks. You told them not to wash their hands. So if they tested positive for COVID-19, you can say for sure that they are not wearing nose masks. They are being in a crowded place, made them at risk for testing positive. So that's why you can only use relative risk for cohort studies, because you are responsible for the exposure. But you can't use relative risk for cross-sectional study or even case control study, because you are not responsible for the exposure. It's found in the environment. Another example I can use is smoking and lung cancer. You are doing a case control study now. For example, you are interested in the cases, those that already have lung cancer. Okay, so someone is asking in the chat, retrospective cohort study. Now, retrospective cohort study is a kind of a cohort study where the exposure was there before you even started the research. I will give you a very good example. In my city where I live, Port Harcourt City, few years ago, we had this issue with soot. as a result of artillery refinery, local refinery that was going on. That local refinery generated a lot of soot, a lot of smoke in the air. All right. So I was not responsible for the exposure. The exposure is already there. But as a researcher, what did I do? I started following up children. From the time that I sensed there was an exposure in the environment, I did a retrospective cohort, meaning that I decided to follow up children. And in following up children, I was checking the admission rate for respiratory tract infection. And I can tell you that during that time we were having issues with soot in Port Harcourt. We had a high increase of respiratory tract infection among children in the University of Port Harcourt Teaching Hospital, where I have an office as well. The rate of respiratory tract infection increased. Now, I was not responsible for the soot exposure. I didn't throw the soot in the air, but I came in between and decided to do my research. So that's a retrospective cohort study. But a prospective cohort study is the one that you were responsible for the exposure. You were responsible for the exposure. For example, you have a group of people. You want to know whether they will develop lung cancer. Of course, ethics is not going to approve this type of study, but I'm just using it as an example for a perspective. You have a group of people and you tell them, smoke 5 sticks of cigarette every day. Smoke 5 sticks of cigarette every day. Then you have another group, which is your control group. You're telling them to eat vegetables and drink water. Then you follow them up over 1 year. And you now test them for lung cancer. The group that were smoking 5 sticks of cigarette every day, and the other group that was eating vegetable and water, to see which group would develop lung cancer. That's a prospective cohort study because you are responsible for the exposure. You told them to smoke. But in a retrospective, that exposure is already in the environment. You just came in between as a researcher and took your research from there. But a cross-sectional study is, if you are using the respiratory tract infection as a cross-sectional study, you will not bother about the exposure because the exposure is not there. It's not something you are aware of. All right, you will just take a population of people and test them for respiratory tract infection. So whether they tested positive or tested negative, but you will not be able to say in a cross-sectional study that the reason why they have respiratory tract infection is because of exposure to so. No. That is the difference. So in a cross-sectional study, it's a prevalence study. You just go to an environment where you think people, like another example now, prevalence of preeclampsia. You want to do prevalence of preeclampsia. Now, who are your exposed population for prevalence of preeclampsia? It's not women of reproductive age. Your exposed population to test for prevalence of preeclampsia, which is an example of a cross-sectional study, is pregnant women, because preeclampsia is hypertension in pregnancy. So a woman that is not pregnant is not an exposed population for preeclampsia. So if I want to do a study on the prevalence of preeclampsia, it means I have to go to the antenatal clinic where I have pregnant women. So it will not be like a community survey because I am not interested in women. I'm interested in pregnant women. So if I have like 100 pregnant women in the antenatal clinic and I started testing them for preeclampsia, if 10 of them tested positive for preeclampsia, it means the prevalence of preeclampsia is what? 10%. But you will not be able to say, oh, the reason why they had preeclampsia is because they were exposed to this. No. That's the limitation of a cross-sectional study. That's why you cannot say risk, relative risk. You can only say odds because it's a probability that the reason why they had preeclampsia is probably because they had a family history of hypertension or a family history of preeclampsia, but you can't say for sure. The only one you can say for sure is the one you were responsible for the exposure, or you can test the exposure. So that's why for cohort study, we use relative risk, but for cross-sectional study or case control study, where For an example of a case control study is like for the lung cancer now, you go to the teaching hospital, all right, and you go to the oncology clinic and take all the folders of persons that have been seen in that clinic from so year to so year. Now, all the patients that have been seen, you now begin to sort all those that have lung cancer. When you finish sorting out those that have lung cancer, you now start checking the history, retrospectively, what the doctor had documented that probably would have made them susceptible to lung cancer. So you start reading about the exposure to know why they had lung cancer. So the exposure in a case control study is in the environment. You were not responsible for the exposure. That's why for case control study, you also use odds ratio. You don't use relative risk. The only time you can use relative risk is cohort study. Now, someone was asking the difference between cohort study and randomized study. Now, for cohort study, all right, you expose, the exposure causes harm for cohort study. The exposure causes harm. But for a randomized control trial, the exposure causes benefits. For a cohort study, you will be exposing them to something that will cause harm. But for a randomized control trial, these are already sick people. Exposing them to a medication, a drug that will make them feel better. That's the difference. That's why randomized control trial is called clinical trial. It's a beneficial study. You are exposing participants to a drug or something, and you are following them over time to see whether they will be better. Why in a cohort study, you're exposing them to something that will make them sick. So that is the difference between cohort and randomized. So both of them have follow-up in them. But one is a toxic exposure, while the other one is a beneficial exposure. So in retrospective cohort study, we use relative yes. In a retrospective cohort study, as long as it's a cohort study, you use relative risk, yes. It's only in cross-sectional and case control that we use odds ratio. All right. So now that I have explained it for you, and I think it is clear now, how do we interpret this odds ratio here now? I am assuming that this is a cross-sectional study. So if we're using the chi-square, the interpretation is already clear for chi-square. It means that there is a 16.52% increase in depression status for those that are positive compared to those that are negative, and our chi-square shows statistical significance. For the odds ratio, what this interpretation means is that those that are positive for COVID-19 test result are 1.95 times. So for Epi Info, please use the cross product, all right, which is the first one. Although the results, whichever one you use, it doesn't really matter because the values are almost the same. But you can just use the first rule, okay? So this odds is telling us that those that tested positive for COVID-19 are 1.95 times more at odds. Are you seeing the term? More at odds of being depressed than those that tested negative. I'll say that again. Our odds is telling us that those that tested positive for COVID-19 are 1.95 times more at odds of having depression compared to those that tested negative. And this is the confidence interval. All right? This is the confidence interval. Now, for relative risk, if this was a cohort study, you would use the relative risk. For relative risk, it would be those that tested positive for COVID-19 are 1.42 times more at risk. Are 1.42 times more at risk. For odds ratio, you use odds because it's a probability. You are not responsible for the exposure, you can't tell. But for relative risk, you are responsible for the exposure, so you can beat your chest and say it is the exposure that caused the disease. So for cohort study, you can say they are 1.42 times more at risk of having depression compared to those that tested negative. And you will also put the confidence interval. Then you can put the p-value. This is the same p-value. So you use this This probability value here also applies to the odds ratio and the relative risk. All right. So if you want to put it in a table, so let's put it in a table. Okay. So if you want to put this in a table now, or if you want to put everything like this in a table, how do you do that table? So let me show you how to do that table. Okay. So before then, someone is asking, when do we use hazard risk in cohort study? Well, hazard is used for survivor when you're doing a study where people died. If you're doing a study where people died, you use hazard risk. But if no one dies, then you can use relative risk. Hazard risk is when death is recorded as a result of the exposure. Which one do we use for randomized control trial? Randomized control trial, you are not measuring risk in randomized control trial now. Randomized control trial, you are giving people medication that will make them better. So you're not measuring risk in randomized trial. So you can use odds if you want to measure, but in randomized control trial, you may not need that because you are giving people a medication. But if you're doing a randomized clinical, okay, sorry, in a randomized clinical trial, the two comparison groups are totally identical in every aspect except for the experiment. They are therefore more accurate and more difficult to conduct than cohort study. Okay, yes, a randomized control trial, yes, it can be, it involves a lot of technicality as well. Apart from the randomization, sometimes it's good to age and sex match them or whatever matching that will cause a confounding. Yeah. Okay, all right. So let me show us how to do the table now. So let me put it here. So let me see if I can make this just a second. Let me see if I can make it a single line so that it will be smaller. Okay. All right. So the table I would need, let me see how many columns I would need. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I need more, I will put it. So the first thing you do your variable, then this would be your depression status, Then here you have your n percent, small letter n. Okay. Sorry, I missed this. This will come down. Here we'll have depression first. Depression, then no depression. Okay, then here we will have total. So I will need one more column. We have total. I'll need one more. Then here I will have my chi-square. My chi-square in bracket, my p-value. Yes, I will need one more again. Then here, let's assume it's a cross-sectional study. I'll have my odds ratio. Then you will have your 95% confidence interval. Then you will now have the p. You will now have the p-value, which is the same p-value. Okay? Or you can, I think it's okay this way. Yeah. All right. So let me centralize everything. Okay, so we'll now go and pick our value. We are focusing on row percentages here. So let me delete column percentage. I don't need the column. We're focusing on the row. So I'm taking the column out. So I want to take this percentage, or let me bring it here so that it's easy to copy and paste. So let me move my 55.10 up here. Then move my 44.90 up here. This is 100. Okay, so I can take out this now. So let me do the same here. So this is 38.58. Then this is 61.42. Then this is my 100. Okay, so I think I'm done. I can remove this. I don't need it anymore. Remove this. Then I can copy this way and come and paste it here. Good job. So we're done with this. So what is left for us now is we need our chi-square and our p-value. We need its chi-square and p-value. So I'll come here. My chi-square is 7.99. Chi-square is 7.99. My p-value is 0.004. 0.004. Is usually three decimals. Since I have 47, then it can be 0.005. It's 3 decimals, it's fine. I can put an asterisk to show that it's statistically significant. Then P is less than 0.05. Yeah. So let me use Times New Roman. Times New Roman. Okay. All right. So let me move this to the middle. You can make the chi-square on both. It's just the p-value that can be bolded to show it's statistically significant. Then we need our odds ratio and 95% confidence interval. So let's pick our odds ratio here. Our odds ratio is 1.95. So it may be hard for me. So let me edit this one so that I just pick it at once. 1.22 to 3.12. That's my, okay. So copy everything and paste it here. Okay, so this is settled. So I can cut this and put it under so that it will align well. Good. Okay, so maybe I can make this 11 so that they can fit in well. Then it's the same, so it's the same P that you use, which is 0.00005 because it generates the same P. So that's why I'm saying if you want to represent everything in the same table, you can just put only the chi-square here and just represent the p-value for this and this. All right. But you can use only this part. Then you can now do another table that houses the odds ratio and the p-value. All right. So if we're interpreting this, so this is much clearer now, but let me make the table finer. So like I showed you the other time. So first of all, this is Times New Romans. So take out all the border first. Take out all the border. Take out all the border. No border, fine. I need the grid line so that I can see what I'm doing. Good. So I come here, I take the top, the bottom, and I take the top. Good. Then for this one, I need the bottom. Then for this one, I need the bottom. Then for this one, this last row, I need the bottom. So my table is set. If I take out the grid line now, you will see that it looks fine. So this is the way the tables usually look. All right. So this is the way that they like your tables to look. So if we're going to use this nicer table now to interpret this, so the interpretation is clearer now. So we can see that there's a higher depression amongst those that tested. Oh, sorry, this should be COVID-19 test result. Sorry, COVID-19 test result. Okay, so we can see that there's a higher prevalence of depression among those that tested positive compared to those that tested negative. And the odds is telling us that those that tested positive are 1.95 more at odds of having depression compared to those that have no depression. So I think that is it for this one. So I don't know if anybody has any question with regards to the odds ratio and the relative risk. For side effect of drug in ROCT. Yeah, for side effects of drug in ROCT, the side effect, Eman, is not the main purpose for, I'm not sure, unless somebody is doing a randomized control trial just to determine side effect of a drug. Okay? If you're doing a randomized control trial to determine a side effect of a drug. So it means that you are testing the harmfulness of a drug, yes. So that can fit into relative risk, yes. If you use that example, that's you are doing a randomized control trial of a drug. Because for the randomized control trial I do, like the last one we just finished, we were not, side effect is like on the side. We were actually testing the benefits of that medication. It was a randomized control trial on postpartum anemia. So, you know, women that have postpartum anemia, those that have hemoglobin less than 9, hemoglobin, I think 9.9 below, they are considered to have postpartum anemia. So we randomize them into those that would take iron tablets or those that would take the iron intravenous drip. Okay. Now, the randomized control trial, it's a beneficial study. We want to see how good that medication can help improve their blood. So we would also be testing if any side effect happened when they were taking the medication. That's on the side. It's not part of the study at all. So it's still a beneficial study. But if you are doing a randomized control trial because you want to test side effect of a drug, I don't know, Sha, but if that is what you want to do, then I think you can use relative risk. Yes, because now you are focusing on the harmful effect of the drug, which is rarely what we do in a randomized control trial. Side effect just comes along the way as we go on with the trial, not like we are doing the trial. Because if you want to do a randomized control trial to determine side effects, I mean, it's ethics. Because see, before you even do a randomized control trial, like in Nigeria, before you even do a randomized control trial, that medication would have gone through a lot of processes. One of the bodies that will test that medication in our setting here is called the NAFDAC. So before we even started our own randomized control trial, NAFDAC tested that medication to ensure that that medication is safe. Because I don't know an ethics committee that will allow you give a medication that will cause a significant side effect that may even cause death. So that's why I'm not sure doing a randomized control trial to test for side effect would be the way to go, because I'm not sure ethics will want to approve that sort of study. All right. Eman, I will give you an opportunity to speak, unless I'm not really understanding you well. So let me allow you to, please, just a second, so that she can clarify, so that we can all learn. I'm coming. So Eman, could you please mute yourself, unmute yourself, and maybe explain this very well? Maybe I'm not getting you clearly.
Thank you, Felix.
Yes.
If it is a new drug, yes, I know we are testing the beneficial effects, but also we record side effects that happening. Could we measure the risk for this, or
Yes. Thank you. Now you're making it clear. So the side effect is not the focus of the randomized control trial, but in doing the randomized control trial, of course, since it's a medication, some patients may have side effect. Yes. If that side effect is significant, I mean, like in our own case now, the side effect was less than 2%. The side effect was less than 2%. And the 2%, and we recruited 1,400 women in four states. You know, I mean, a side effect of less than 2%, it would not be significant in any way. So I'm not sure you would even want to do a relative risk on that, because it's so insignificant. You see, yeah. But if you have a significant side effect, and honestly, I will query a medication that will have a significant side effect to have passed through ethics, passed through the drug validation company, and the rest of them. But peradventure, you have a very huge high side effect, yes, you can use relative risks to actually test. Yes, Eman. I don't know if that is clear. Yeah, Eman, is that clear?
Yes, yes, it is clear. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Yeah, thank you for that insightful question. I probably would not have thought in that direction. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so someone is asking quasi-experimental, okay? Quasi-experimental, that word quasi means false, meaning it's not a true randomized control trial. A true randomized control trial involves medication. That's why it's called ROCT, randomized control trial. It involves medication. Now, it's an experimental study that involves medication. But you can do other experimental studies that does not involve medication. For example, you can have people and you give them education. Instead of giving them medication, you are giving them education, you are giving them lecture, you're giving them any other intervention you're giving that is not drug. Then that experimental study is a quasi-experimental study. The only true experimental study is the randomized control trial, the one you give medication. But any other one that you are doing that is an experimental study and you are not giving medication, it's a quasi-experimental study. All right. So how do you change the confidence interval from 95% to no, please use 95% confidence interval. Don't change your confidence interval to 97. It's not necessary. Use 95% confidence. 95% confidence is allowable. It's large enough. It means you are 95% confident that this result that you've gotten is accurate. So it's high enough, meaning that you only have a tolerable error of 5%, which is admissible. All right, please just leave it at 95%. If the researcher is responsible for exposure assignment of any type, wouldn't it make the study type intervention experimental as compared to cohort study, which I think is one type of observational study? Like I said, experimental studies, all right, is the one that provide beneficial effect. Beneficial effect. Experimental studies are meant to provide beneficial. That's why it's called an experiment. Any experiment you're doing should provide beneficial effect. Okay, so the true experimental study is the randomized control trial. Anyone you are not giving medication is the quasi-experimental. Quasi means false experimental. So in a cohort study, it's an exposure outcome study. It's not an experiment. More like you are exposing to be able to, like you are giving them something to be able to tell what the okay, let me give another example. During my bachelor's, there's this plant that we boil in Nigeria here, and people drink the extract for malaria. You drink it for 3 days. Some people drink it more. So during my bachelor's, I did an experiment where I used 42 Wista rats, these albino rats, 42 of them. I segmented them into different cohorts, and I gave them different doses of I gave them different doses of the extract of that plant. It's called Phyllanthus amarius. Some of them I gave them later after testing my LD100, testing my LD50. Some I gave them later dose, they died immediately. Some died later. You know, at the end of the day, I was able to get the dose that would not kill them. So I gave them different doses of the extract of the rats, and I followed them over time. Okay, so in that case now, yes, I will consider that an experiment. Okay, but what we consider a true experiment in this case of research now is the randomized control trial. But you can call the cohort, so that's why I'm giving you this as an example now. Yes, it's more like a cohort study because I exposed them to different doses of the extract and I followed the rats over time and dissected them. What was the goal of the research? To see whether they would develop histopathological side effects on their liver as they take different doses of that extract. All right, it's an experiment that I did. So I dissected the rats in different days, and yes, the study showed that there were histopathological changes in their hepatic cells. However, for those that I kept few days after they had taken the extract that didn't die, they were dissected and their liver were also checked. And we noticed that the liver had the capacity to recover itself from the toxicity of that drug if that drug was not given at very lethal doses. Yes, so we may consider that an experiment, but I'm saying a true experiment is the RUCT. All right. Odds ratio is adjusted on, yeah, odds ratio is unadjusted odds ratio. Well, yes, we have adjusted, we have unadjusted. I'm going to explain that. Epi Info does not have unadjusted and adjusted. Epi Info just has odds ratio. Is when you're doing bivariant logistic regression using SPSS that you can do adjusted and unadjusted, and that's what I'm going to show you next. Do you correctly state that 1.22 to 3-point confidence interval in the interpretation of the odds? In this example, how do you correctly state the 1.22 to 1-point confidence in the interpretation of the odds? You don't talk about the confidence interval in the interpretation of the odds. You just focus on the interpretation of the odds and put your confidence interval in brackets close to the odds. You don't have to talk about your 95% confidence interval. Then in ROCT, how do we measure the beneficial effect? Like taking this Nemo vaccine reduces the chances of having pneumonia, reduces the severity of pneumonia. Like I said, you can use odds. Yes, you can use odds. You can use odds. Yes, because it's a beneficial. Okay, you can use odds because odds has increase. Odds has more likely, less likely. Okay, so if you use odds, then you may be able to say that the pneumo vaccine reduces the odds for having pneumonia. Yes, you can, because it will not be giving you numbers like 1.2. It will be giving you numbers like 0 point something, 0 point something. So 1 point something means more at odds, but 0 point something at odds. So it will probably give you 0 point something that will now tell you that this vaccine will cause a beneficial effect. So if you have like what you have here now, let me show you what I mean now. So if we have positive here, if I reverse this now, okay, let me use, yes. So another thing I wanted to show you is if you don't have a data like this, like the data sheet, let's say someone comes to you now and they have analyzed their data, okay, and they don't have the person analyzed the data and didn't produce the inferential statistical values, and they give you these tables. So that's one of the benefits of Epi Info that I want to show you. Then I will use it to explain what someone was asking about beneficial effect. Odds can be both ways too. It can have a beneficial effect. So let's assume now someone brings this to you. You can use Epi Info to generate these statistical tests. So how do you do that? So let's close this. Let's go back to the Epi Info. So in that case, you come to Start Calc. In that case, you come to Start Calc here. All right. So you click your Start Calc like this. Then you come to 2x2 table. 2x2 table. All right. So you click on your 2x2 table. So it generates this. So it gives you the outcome. So as you can see now, the outcome and the exposure. So you impute these values here. 54, 44, 103, and 164. You see it? So it has generated the chi-square. It has generated the p-value. It has also generated the odds. It has generated the relative risk, the risk ratio. So whether you're going to use odds or you're going to use relative, the risk ratio is dependent on the study design. Now, in this particular one now, our interpretation is that those that tested positive, they are 1.95 at odds of having depression. What if we switch this the other way around so that we'll be able to see that the COVID-19 test result is beneficial? Okay, so what if we switch this? So let's say now, let me replicate this. Let me bring this down. I hope you are following me now to show you that odds can also have beneficial. So let me bring the negative. Okay. So what I want to do now is, first of all, let me switch this. I want this to be no depression, and I want this to be depression, because my interest is in no depression now. So I want this to be negative. I want this to be negative, and I want this to be positive. So I want to see the beneficial effect of testing negative. So I have to switch these values. So negative and no depression. Sorry, let me take out this. Negative and no depression is this. Negative and no depression is this. Negative and depression is this. Negative and depression is this. Now, sorry, this will go the other way. So let me bring this up here. Then this will now be 98. Then positive and no depression. Positive and no depression is this. Positive and no depression is this. Positive and depression is this. So I've switched the table now so that you can see the beneficial effect. So let's key in this back into this. Let me go to strata 2 and put in these values. 164, 103, 44, and 54. Sorry, no, hold on. Oh, there. I didn't do this well. Sorry, just a second. Sorry, just a second. Let me. 103, 103, 164, 54, 44. Okay, sorry. I didn't do it well. So if I switch this over to the other way around, so this is 103, 164, 54, and 44. You see the odds have reduced from 1 point something. The chi-square will still stay, but the odds have reduced. So when the odds reduce from 1, it's now a beneficial effect. So because I've switched this negative, I've brought this negative up, because my interest is no longer the positive, but the negative. I brought it up. All right, as you can see here. So what this is telling us that those that tested negative for COVID-19 have a what? A beneficial effect. The odds reduced for depression. The odds reduced for depression. So meaning that there is a beneficial effect for negative result for COVID-19 when it comes to depression. So as you can see, the odds is now lower. So which is what someone was asking. How do you now use odds as a benefit, especially for randomized control trial? The odds have to reduce for you to be able to say the benefit is there. Okay. No. There's no blinding for quasi. There's no blinding for quasi experimental study. No. Do you know that quasi, see, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Quasi-experimental study doesn't even have randomization. It's a forced experimental study. It doesn't, you don't even have to do randomization in quasi-experimental. So it doesn't even require blinding. There's no blinding for quasi. There's no blinding. Can we see the cohort study this way? You just check if your sample population have been exposed to your interested exposure, baseline data, and you don't necessarily have to expose them. Well, if you are not responsible for the exposure, then it's not cohort. Cohort, either the exposure was there, which is very obvious, like the one I told you about the suit, or you are the one pumping the exposure. Then you're following them up to see whether they will develop the outcome you are interested in. All right. So if the population is just exposed and you yourself, you are not aware what they were exposed, you are just guesstimating. That's odds ratio is guesstimate. You can't say for sure what the exposure risk was because you didn't cause it. So you use odds ratio. So if the exposure is just there, then it's not cohort. Cohort, there is an intentional exposure. That's why it's called cohort. Yes, you can use relative risk. Yes, you can use relative risk. You can use relative risks for the reduced risk. Yes. So instead of saying reduce odds, you can also use reduced risk. So meaning there's a beneficial effect for whatever medication that is being used. Okay. But if you're saying reduce risk now, it will not be in terms of the medication. It will be in terms of the side effects, not the because the medication is supposed to be a beneficial outcome. It is the side effect that the medication is supposed to cause now that you're doing relative risk for. Then you're able to say, oh, there is a lower risk of side effects of this medication. Okay. All right. I want to show us, like I said, odds, Epi Info just have the odds ratio and the relative risks. It doesn't have adjusted and unadjusted. So I have a webinar where I spent almost an hour plus talking about logistic regression and so I would recommend you find that webinar where I focused on logistic regression. But I will just do something quick here. Okay. So I'm going to use this data, okay, to do the unadjusted odds ratio and the adjusted. Okay. The only difference is that the unadjusted, also called crude, is the one you're not testing for confounders. All right. Now, in this example, in this EPINFO example, let's do that analysis again. Sorry, I think okay, let me see if it's in my Word. It's here. Okay. Okay, fine. So if you look at these analysis now, we did COVID-19 test result and depression status, but it's just COVID-19 test result. We didn't also test for other things. So the COVID-19 test result, what if there are other confounders of this COVID-19 test result, which there would be? Confounders like the person's outing. Let's say in this COVID-19 test result, what if those that go out more often tested positive more? Or those that don't wear nose masks tested positive more compared to those that tested negative? So the COVID-19 test result, there may be things that may be making these COVID-19 positive cases more prevalent. All right. And the more you have those, the more you have positive cases and the more you have depression. So what if we take out all those other confounders so that it is only the COVID-19 test result that will be giving us whatever status for the depression we need, not other things that are piled up. So that's why if you're using SPSS now, you can do odds ratio, which is the unadjusted odds ratio, also called crude. But you can also add other things that may be responsible. Let's do, for example, now, looking at this data, I have high blood pressure, yes and no. I have quality of life, poor and good. I'm interested in, let's see, I'm interested in if those that have high blood pressure will have more poor quality of life. Okay, if those that have high blood pressure will have more poor quality of life. So you can do a chi-square for that to see. In SPSS, you just go to analyze, descriptive, and cross-tabulations. Your column is the dependent variable, which is the quality of life. Then your high blood pressure is the independent variable. It goes to your rows. Then you choose your chi-square, which is the test for checking differences in proportion. You choose your chi-square. After you choose your chi-square, you choose your role percentage. That's the difference. In SPSS, you can either choose role or column, but in this case, it's role. You continue, and that's it. And you say, okay. So when you do that, you will see it has run the analysis for us. So we can see here, high blood pressure. Yes, 59. You see? Those that have high blood pressure, you see, 59.7 against 36.0. So there were more poor quality of life in those that have high blood pressure compared to those that did not. Are you seeing that? 59.7 against 36.0. So high blood pressure causes higher poor quality of life compared to those that do not have high blood pressure. And what is our chi-square saying? You see that thing I told you, Pearson's chi-square. So SPSS gives you Pearson's chi-square, 9.00, 0.003, which is lower than 0.05. So there's a statistical significant difference here, which shows that there's a significantly high poor quality of life among those that have high blood pressure. Good. So this is the chi-square. So let's do the odds ratio now. That's the crude odds ratio for this chi-square. You go to analyze. Is regression now for SPSS. Regression, binary logistic regression, not the multi. The multi is when you add so many because you're testing for confounders. So the binary logistic regression. Now, your dependence is the quality of life. Then we are checking for high blood pressure. So all you need to do is to check the 95% confidence interval. That's all. And you're good to go. So that's it. So that's our odds. In SPSS, it's called exponential B. Why in Epi Info is called odds ratio. So this is our odds, exponential B. 2.627. That's the 95% confidence interval. 1.38 and 4.97. So to interpret this now would be what? Can someone in the room, let me see if you guys are really following now. Can someone boldly interpret this? I've given you opportunity to. Can someone boldly interpret this? What does this 2.62 means? This odds ratio. Who has the mind? So what does the 2.62 mean? Okay, nobody's talking. All right, so let me just say it because of our time. So the 2.662 simply means that those that have high blood, okay, Mohammed, go ahead. Mohammed, go ahead. I think I've given you opportunity. Okay, just a second. Let me see. Yeah, go ahead. I've given you opportunity to interpret. Mohammed, yes, go ahead. If you're talking, we're not hearing you. Oh, unmute. I thought I had unmuted. Okay, just a second. Maybe I'm not doing things well. Just a second. I thought I did unmute everyone. Allow participant to unmute. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, please try again.
Okay, thank you very much. Let I try that one in the best
Okay,
way. And those who have a poor quality of life
okay.
are 2.6 times or is higher of having high blood pressure.
Yes, you got it, but you twisted it. You know
Mhm.
your twist it, change the direction, because the poor quality, the quality of life is the dependent variable, while the
Yeah.
blood pressure is the independent. So say it again,
Okay. Okay.
twist
Okay.
it. Yeah,
Okay. Those who have a high blood pressure
yeah.
are more likely are
Okay,
more likely to have more likely to have a 2.6 odds than those who don't have a high blood pressure.
okay,
So
very good. Yeah, very good. Thank you very much. That is very correct. Thank you, Muhammad. So what he said is those that tested positive for high blood pressure are 2.627 times more likely or more at odds to have poor quality of life. So that is correct. So this is our crude odds ratio, which is what we tested in Epi Info, but Epi Info does not have adjusted odds ratio. So adjusted odds ratio is your testing for confounders. Now you have tested this now. Hmm? Based on this, your data. Your data is showing you that those that have high blood pressure, hmm, have more poor quality of life. But what if the high blood pressure was not really what is making them have this poor quality of life? What if it's because of their employment status? Maybe most of them that have this high blood pressure were not employed. What if the employment status was, influencing the high blood pressure? What if their educational level is influencing high blood pressure, or their gender is influencing high blood pressure? So you only did in your regression, you only did high blood pressure and quality of life. What if there are other things that is making this high blood pressure to be greater? So you add them in the multi just to be sure that high blood pressure is standing on its own, is not influenced by any other thing. So you now do your multiple logistic regression. So you go to analyze regression, but this time you go to multinomial. Your dependent will still be the quality of life, but apart from the high blood pressure, you can also put gender, maybe educational status, and maybe their employment into all this to see whether it's going to still be significant. So once you do that, that's all. You just say, okay, and you go and look at your high blood pressure again. Your high blood pressure is still significant. Are you seeing that the high blood pressure is still significant? It has even increased from 2 point to 9.53. What is that telling you? It tells you that high blood pressure is a true predictor. So the other variables you have added did not reduce the effect. Instead, it increased the effect of the odds of high blood pressure. So now you can say for sure that even after adjusting for confounding variables, high blood pressure was still statistically significant to show that high blood pressure is a true predictor of poor quality of life. Yeah, I think I did multi-coloniality in the webinar on logistic regression. I think I did it, but I'm not sure. Please check out the webinar on. So just a second, uh let me get I think so just a second. Let me get the YouTube link so that you can check the list. so that you can check the list. So let me put the YouTube link so that you can check the list of the webinars. So this is the YouTube link. So I'm putting the YouTube link. Please search for the logistic regression webinar. It's like I did multi-coloniality there because those are part of the validation test you do before you decide whether you're going to do logistic regression or not. Yes, I think it should be there. We have to refer whether the reference category is good or poor. Well, so it's actually a good question, Muhammad. So in the case, the ones that is not your interest value, it's your reference. So in other words now, for this one, our reference value will be good because we are interested in the poor. The value that you are interested in, the other one would be your reference value. But we don't usually bother when we are using a variable that has two values because your interest is one, then the other one would be your reference value. But when you have more than one value, then you can now specifically choose your reference value. But I don't want to go too much on this because I treated all these reference values, all these things in the logistic regression webinar. So I think I would appreciate if you watch it. All right, but just to answer your question, Muhammad, in this our own case now, for this particular one, the reference value would be good quality of life. So good quality of life would be the reference value would be no blood pressure. The reference value will be no blood pressure because our interest is those that have high blood pressure. Then those that do not have high blood pressure will be our reference. The reason why is your reference because you interpret your results against the reference. For example, we say that those that have high blood pressure are 9.53 times after adjusting for confounders more likely to have poor quality of life against the reference value, those that do not have high blood pressure. So the reference value is the one you reference the result to. That's why it's called the reference value. Okay. All right. Okay, Muhammad wants to
Yeah.
okay, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Here you run a multiple logistic regression instead of a binary logistic regression because we have a binary outcome.
Yes. Yeah,
And here you,
so what I'm saying is that I only ran multiple logistic regression because I want to show you how to do the adjusted. The interest is not in the reference value now, because if you're going to choose a reference value, you will choose the reference value when you are doing your bivariant logistic regression. Then it will continue because in your multiple logistic regression, it doesn't give you an opportunity to choose a reference value. Okay, so let me show you what I mean. If you go to analyze, you go to your regression now. Binary logistic regression. Now, this is the high blood pressure. The high blood pressure has my reference, my main value, which is the having the blood pressure, yes, which is 1. So let me show you now. The yes is 1. Let me switch this. Yes is 1, no is 0. You see? Watch this line. I'm switching. Yes is 1, no is 0. 1 means I am interested in the yes. No is the one I'm not interested in. So the one I'm not interested in is 0. By default is your reference value. When you have two values, 1 is your value you're interested in, while the 0 is the one you're not interested in bivariant logistic regression, which by default is your reference value, whether you choose it or not. The same thing with the quality of life. You can see the poor is 1. The good is no, is 0. So I'm interested in yes, and I'm interested in poor. So by default, yes is 1, poor is 1, no is reference, good is reference. So when you put them in your binary logistic regression, you don't even need to choose a reference. By default, the logistic regression knows that the 0 is the reference because you're going to interpret the result against the reference. You get it, Muhammad? The only time you choose a reference is when you choose a value that maybe has more than 2 values, like do I have anyone that have more than tertiary, secondary? Let's say this one has, let me see if it has. Very good. So this one has 1, 2, 3, 4. So this one has 1, 2, 3, 4. So you will have to consciously choose a reference value for educational status. So which one is going to be your reference value? Is it no formal education, so that, or tertiary or secondary or primary, so that whatever odds ratio you get, you will interpret it against the reference value. So if I do my binary logistic regression now, instead of high blood pressure, I choose educational status. I will have to choose a reference value. So how do you choose a reference value? You go to categorical. You go to categorical, then you move your educational status into the categorical covariate. Then you now decide which will be your reference value. Is it 1, which is first, or is it 4, which is last? Is it the no formal education, or is it tertiary? So you make a decision which should be your reference, then you continue. As you see, reference category, you continue, and you now say, okay. So you specifically choose a reference value when you have more than 2 values. But if it's just 2 values, by default, SPSS will make 0 your reference value. Mohammed, I don't know if it's clear. All right, so let me not take so much time on logistics. This is not a logistic regression webinar, so I would appreciate if you can take the time and watch the logistic regression webinar where I took it step by step from the beginning and explained all this. Okay, so I don't know if there are any questions. I want to show you how to calculate sample size before we wrap up. Is there any question before I take you to sample size determination? We have few minutes, but sample size doesn't take time, so it's fine. So any question before I show you how to calculate sample size? Okay, all right, while you're preparing your question, let me show you how to calculate sample size. All right, so you can calculate sample size using Epi Info. All right, so you come here, you come to start calc, the same place, start calc. So the first sample size is sample size for population survey. So if you want to calculate sample size for population survey, you come here. All right. So for population survey, you come to this first part. For sample size for cohort or cross-sectional, that means a comparative. Cohort meaning a sample size for a study where you have exposed and unexposed. You come here. Then for unmatched case control, you come here. Okay. Okay, so I'm not clear on what do you mean by advanced statistics. Cluster is just a population. Cluster is just a population. All right, you can have different clusters. Different clusters can mean different primary schools where you're collecting your sample from. So whatever statistics you do is based on the population. All right, so I'm not clear Unless you can, Shushi, you can tell me what you mean by advanced statistics in the Epi Info menu. Okay, let me see. Okay, in the Epi Info menu. Advanced statistics in the Epi Info menu. I'm not seeing advanced statistics here. I'm not clear. Are you able to unmute yourself? In classic, okay? I'm in classic now. Advanced statistic. Okay, for these ones. Oh, okay. Well, this is not the focus for this webinar. Yeah, but I mean linear regression, logistic. Yeah, logistic regression doesn't work very well. Logistic regression doesn't work very well with Epi Info. So that's why I didn't bother showing you logistic regression in Epi Info. I showed you logistic regression in SPSS. Now, when you say linear regression, yeah, you can do linear regression, but I didn't focus on that. So let me just show you that quickly. So linear regression is usually done when you want to check flow of continuous variable. So look at this data now. All right, look at this data now. You have age. Linear regression is only done for continuous variables. So let me show us that quickly before we go to the sample size determination. All right, so you have weight, you have height, you have BMI. So you can do linear regression. That it will tell you if age is increasing, is BMI increasing. So linear regression is for testing the flow of two continuous variables to tell you if one continuous variable is increasing, is the other one increasing or reducing. So we can use age and BMI, and it gives you a value between 0 and 1. It gives you a value between 0 and 1. Anything that is 0.5 below is weak linear regression. Anything from 0.6 above is moderate and strong linear regression. So another name for that linear regression is Pearson's correlational coefficient. So it gives you a value between 0 and 1. So you can tell whether there's a linear regression, whether if age is increasing, is BMI increasing, which will give you a positive value. Is age is increasing, is BMI reducing, it will give you a negative value, and it will also give you a p-value. So if we want to do a linear regression now between age and BMI, we can do that. So we can go to read and choose our data again. Sometimes too, if you have chosen your data before, you can still, without going through this process, you can choose your data from recent data source. So I can come to recent data source and choose my data. Okay. Yeah, but no, this is not the data that I am working with. No, it's not the right data. Let me choose it. The one I'm working with is on the desktop. Okay, intervention. Good. So let's do the linear regression now. So you come to linear regression. So your outcome variable is my BMI. Then my other variable is probably the age. That's all you do here. You choose your outcome variable, you choose the age, because age is the one that is influencing the BMI. Age does not reduce. Age will only increase, but BMI can increase or reduce, depending on whether you're eating or not eating or other factors. So you put your BMI in the outcome variable and your age in the other variable, and you say, okay. You see, it will generate the coefficients. So this is the Pearson's correlational coefficient. It runs between 0 and 1. Anything less than 0.5 is weak. Anything from 0.7 to 1 is strong. So based on this Pearson's coefficient now, which is negative, this is negative and this is weak. So what this is telling you now is that there is a linear regression between age and BMI, but that linear regression is negative, meaning that as the age is increasing, the BMI is reducing, and this association is weak. As you can see, 0.06 is weak. That's less than 0.5. So if I'm interpreting this now, I will say that there is a weak negative linear regression between age and BMI. For as the participant age is increasing, the BMI is reducing. And this association is statistically significant. As you can see, the p-value 0.001, which is less than 0.05. So there's a negative but weak linear regression between age and BMI, as you can see in this value here now. Okay, the blood pressure, yeah, I will share the blood pressure. Yes, I will share it when I'm sharing the recording. I will share that. Yeah, so I have a webinar on, well, I have done a webinar on multi-level linear regression, yes. So check on the YouTube channel. Yeah, check on the YouTube channel. You will find it there. Yeah. So, okay, I think what will happen, Sushi, that is my email. Please contact me after the webinar and let's discuss this offline if that works for you, okay? So that's my email, Sushi. So let's talk about this so that we just have few minutes. I think what you're asking is really good, but I don't know if I'll be able to show you that now. But ask your question if it's something that I can do quickly. But if not, I'm sharing my WhatsApp. We can take it. So chat me up so that we don't invest a few minutes of our time on that. Okay? Yeah. Thanks. So let me show you determining sample size so that we can wrap up. We have barely 10 minutes. So if you're checking for sample size for population, you come here, you click on this, it will ask you for the parameter. The first thing it's going to ask you is the population size is what? Let's assume the population size is 100,000. What is the expected frequency? Expected frequency simply means it's a population study and you are going to be testing for prevalence of something. So based on studies you have read, things you have checked online, what is the expected frequency? What is the expected prevalence of that condition? Let's say preeclampsia. The expected prevalence for preeclampsia, let's say is 30%. Your margin of error by default is 5%. Design effect simply means if you have a cluster like Salihu was talking about a cluster, meaning you are going to be collecting your data from different clusters. Okay? Maybe in a primary school is a cluster. A primary school is a cluster. And let's say you want to collect your data from 3 primary schools. So 3 primary schools will be like 3 clusters. All right. Now the design effect means whatever sample size you are going to be getting, do you want to multiply it by 2? It depends on you as the researcher. You can do a design effect of 1. You can do a design effect of 2, meaning you're multiplying it by 2. So if you're using a design effect of 1 without multiplication, each cluster you are going to pick a sample size of 419 if you're doing a confidence interval of 99.99. But we usually recommend a confidence interval of 95% is okay. Don't go below 95%. You can choose a confidence interval of 95%. That's usually the default. So if you're using a confidence interval, a confidence level of 95%, it means your minimum sample would be 108 for one cluster. So it means you're going to do 108 times 3, which will now give you a total sample of 324. But if you're only collecting the data from one cluster, then this will be just one population cluster is just one. So your sample size would be 322 at 95% confidence interval. But if you are collecting from 2 clusters, it means you divide that number by 2. Each cluster will be 161 times 2. So if your population is more than 100,000, let's say your population is 250,000, the sample size will also change. You have to know your expected frequency, meaning the frequency or the prevalence of that condition that you want to test in your research. That's what you're going to put here. 5% default. Design effect simply means if you're multiplying by 1 or by 2 by 3, which helps you increase your sample size. If you have the muscle to actually do that, you can go ahead. So that's for population. But if you're doing a study, a cohort or a cross-sectional study, where you are checking for case and control, you come here. So you click here and you also put the parameter. The first thing is your two-sided confidence interval. Please choose 95%. Choose 95%. The power. I have a webinar on sample size determination. Please look for it. Look for the webinar on sample size determination. I explained power there very well. Because of our time. Please look for the webinar on sample size determination. So default power is 80%. Default power is 80%. I explained the reason why we use 80% or higher. Then, based on previous study, the exposed unexposed ratio, you will see it depends on what you want to do. If you're using exposed 10 and you want to use unexposed 10, that's 1:1. Okay? Meaning that if you want to use the same sample size in your control as the same sample size in your case, then your ratio is 1. Okay? Then the percentage of the outcome in the unexposed, meaning the prevalence of the outcome in the unexposed, you have to get it from a previous study. The prevalence from a previous study maybe is 21%. Then if it's a cross-sectional study, then you will get the odds ratio. If it's a cohort study, then you will get the risk ratio. It will be in the abstract because you use a similar study, a previous similar study to calculate your sample size. So like I said, watch the webinar on sample size determination to get more insight on this. So if I check the previous study and the odds ratio for preeclampsia is 2.1, then I put it there. It will by default calculate a risk ratio if it was a cohort study. Risk ratios are usually lower than odds ratio. Then it will calculate by default the percent in the exposed. If you put the percent for the exposed, then it will now give you the sample size for each group. So each group will be, for the exposed will be 146. For the unexposed, it will be 146 because you said your ratio is 1:1. So that's why it will give you equal sample size. So you can either use Kelsey or you can either use Flace. It doesn't really matter. All right. These are different epidemiological. It's like you have Fisher's exact, which is someone's name, Pearson's, which is someone, these are epidemiologist names. So this is the one from this author. This is the one from this author. It doesn't really matter. All right. Anyone you choose is fine. All right. Anyone you choose, it's fine. So that is how you calculate the sample size if you're doing a comparative study for cross-sectional or for cohort. So the other one is if you're doing for case control, it's almost similar. If it's a case control, you choose your confidence interval. The default power is 80. The ratio controls to case 1:1 is usually better. Then the percent of control exposed, meaning the percent of the case, the prevalence of the case you are interested in. Okay. Now, the case you are interested in, let's say if the case you are interested in is, let's say the case you're interested in is like lung cancer. Now, prevalence of lung cancer is 20%. Now, what is the percent of those that are like the control group? If the case group is 20%, what will the percent for the control group, those that are not exposed, what will be the percentage be? Okay, for lung cancer, it may be lower. If the prevalence for lung cancer is 20% for exposed, those that you exposed to cigarette smoking, what about those that are not exposed to cigarette smoking? The prevalence may be lower, maybe like 8% or lower. You can get it from a previous study, you can put it there. Then, since it's a case control study, it will be odds ratio, not risk ratio. So you can look for the odds from a previous study, which may be 3.1. So those that are not those that are exposed are 3.1 times more at odds to have lung cancer. You put it there, and by default, it will calculate the percent of the cases and give you the sample size for the case and the sample size for the control. So this is how it works using Epi Info to calculate your sample size. All right, I think this is where we wrap up. We have 2 minutes to go. Thank you very much. So I'm going to give you an opportunity for some questions. Thank you. Okay, so let me see if I can. I think I'd given you the opportunity. Yeah. So if you don't have, yeah, someone asked a question. Just sorry. Let me take a look at that question again. Yeah, someone says, and if you don't have a local prevalence result, then you use 50%. If you don't have a local prevalence result, then use international prevalence. If you don't have international prevalence, then use 50%. 50% is usually default prevalence. What do we do when we have different prevalences? Just choose one. When you have different prevalences, choose one. Just choose one. Yeah, just choose one. And choose the one that is close to your study and that is close to your settings. So if you have a prevalence, let's say if you're carrying out the study in Kano State, for example, you have a prevalence that was done in River State, and you have a prevalence that was done in Sokoto. Of course, you choose the one Sokoto because Sokoto is in the northern region. The same thing with Kano, so that one is better than choosing South, which is in Port Harcourt. Yeah, if you don't have a I think you will have to guesstimate. Or if you don't have a previous odds, you will have to guesstimate. But I doubt. It's usually rare not to have a previous odds. If you don't have in your region, you will definitely have an international. It is rare. But if you don't have a previous odds, then you will have to guesstimate what the odds will be. Sometimes too, you can guesstimate using a similar condition. You can use a similar condition to guesstimate. Yeah. So please ask your question. I think I have given you an opportunity to unmute yourself and ask. Can't use a pilot? You can use a pilot, yes. You can use a pilot, yes. If you have a pilot odds ratio, you can use it, yes. It's allowed.
Hello?
Any other question? Yes, Salihu, yes.
Sorry to take you back to day one. I have a data set that I collected using Kobo Collect. And then for multiple
Okay.
choice questions,
Okay.
they are being expressed as binary, like 1 and 0, across
Yes.
different columns. So I wanted to
Yes.
know, for a data set like that, can I analyze it using Epi Info, and how do I go about it?
Yes, you can analyze it using Epi Info. So, but the thing is that the multiple response you are talking about now, is it one question that has those multiple response answers?
Yes,
Is
actually,
one question? Eh?
more than one question actually. But each question has
Each question has multiple. Okay, so
yes.
that's a very interesting question you have asked. You can analyze it with Epi Info, but the challenge is that you will do some manual calculation. let me give you a quick example. Sorry, let me share my screen and answer this because it will benefit more persons. So let's say this is your data sheet. I'm trying not to create a new one. Just a second now. Multiple response. So I will use something else to. Okay, so let's assume, let me take out this. Just wait. Okay, so let's say this one, you asked a question about COVID-19 knowledge, huh? Right? You asked a question on COVID-19 knowledge. So this is more like knowledge one. This is knowledge, let's say knowledge two. So this is knowledge two. Then this is knowledge three. So this is what you meant, right? So let's
Yes.
say this is not this is knowledge four. Good. All right. So this is so let me just delete from here. Good. So let's say you have knowledge one, knowledge two, knowledge three, knowledge four, and maybe you have knowledge five. So this is knowledge five. Okay. So the thing now is this, huh? You want to add, so this knowledge one, knowledge two, knowledge three, knowledge four, knowledge five, they are all the same question to get about so sorry, I think the best way to do this is to change that yes to correct. So that way it will tally with what you have in mind. Abi? So let's say yes. Yes, correct answer. Eh? Right? Let's replace the yes to correct answer. Then let's replace no to wrong answer. Let's replace the no to wrong answer. Then let's replace I don't know. Just a second. We are making progress. Just a second. Let me sort this out. Oh, no, I don't know is in no. I'm sorry. That's why I didn't take it. Sorry. So, sorry. Let me do I don't know first. I don't know to wrong answer. Okay. Then no, also wrong answer. Good. Then yes, correct answer. So let me see if this works. Oh, there, sorry, my time is gone, so I'm trying to. Okay, so this is what you mean. So you have knowledge. Oh, there it has. You have knowledge one, knowledge two, knowledge three, and you want to get one number, right? So you want to get one correct answer now. So what you're going to do, it's a little manual, all right? So let me save this as new P so that I can just use it for this demonstration. So the data sheet is in baseline. So I'm using baseline. So what you do is this. It's a little manual, Sha, because you have them different sheets. So there's nothing you can do. So you just come here, import that data sheet. Oh, sorry. Import the data sheets. So we are using baseline. So once you do that, then you can analyze all of them. Analyze all of them, all the answers. All right. Ignore. So analyze all of them. So what you now do is, if you check the first one, you'll be able to tell. That's one thing with multiple response. So you are now able to tell the correct answer here. So let me copy all this now. So this is what you do. Sorry. So let me get a blank sheet now. So this is what you do. You have all of them. So you have your table now. Okay. So you have your variable. You have your variable. You have your frequency. Then you have your percent. So now here you have the correct answer. Then here you have the wrong answer. Wrong answer. So your correct answer now, you have to add all of them manually. That's why I say there's a manual stuff here. So you do, for the correct answer, you have 162 plus 54 plus 40 plus 124 plus 119. That gives you a total of 4499. You now do the same with wrong answer. 203 plus 311 plus 325 plus 241 plus 246. That gives you a total of 1326. So your table now, let's say if this table 1 on knowledge, so you will have to put the total here, which is 499 plus 1326. That is 1825. But what you will let us know now is, if this is your knowledge, let's say knowledge of COVID-19, what you will do now, you will do this. You will now add something here, multiple response. That's what you will now do, because the population here, I'm sorry, here will be 365. I'm sorry. It will be the population 365. But here will now be 1825. So you are now letting us know that this particular question is multiple response, because the number is more than the 365 that is the population. So now you will now calculate the percentage manually. So 499 times 100, 499 times 100% divided by 1825. That will give us 27.34. The other one will now be 72.65. 72.66. Okay, so that is it. I don't know if the time spent is worth it. So is it clear?
Yes, very clear. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Someone asked, how do we calculate sample size for quasi-experimental study? Yes, quasi-experimental is this one. Quasi-experimental, you can use this one for quasi-experimental. Sorry, let me show you the one to use for quasi-experimental. You can use this one, praise God. You can use this one for quasi-experimental. This one, sample size for cohort or cross-sectional. This one will do for quasi-experimental. All right? Yes, because it's a comparative study. If you want to use Epi Info to calculate it, you will use this one. It will serve, yes. It will serve. However, there is a sample size determination for quasi-experimental. Praise God, you have my contact now, so you can actually send me a WhatsApp message. I can share it with you. There's a formula that I've documented, like in a Word document, that all you need to do is change the numbers for quasi-experimental, or you can use this one. Design it. No, there's no design effect less than 1. There's no design effect less than 1. I think we have overshot our time. I think this is it for the day. Thank you very much, everyone.